You know, it's strange how life can seem so stable, so damn predictable, until it just crumbles without warning, like a flimsy house of cards. That's exactly how it went down with me and Emma. We'd been married 6 long years. 6 whole years where I thought our marriage was strong. Sure, we had our share of arguments, and yeah, things got a little stale at times like they do with any couple. But if you'd asked me then, I'd have told you we were happy. Everything seemed all right until it wasn't. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs, but you never expect the person who swore they'd love you forever to morph into a complete stranger. It all started with Emma taking a new job. She was over the moon about it. I'll give her that. New company, new responsibilities, a lot of opportunities, as she put it. But almost overnight, something shifted in her. The first time I noticed was over something small, one of those things you'd usually brush off. She used to text me throughout the day, random stuff like, "What are you having for lunch?" or "Don't forget the milk." Then one day, those little texts just stopped. I chalked it up to her being busy with the new job. But it didn't end there. Soon, her schedule started changing. Suddenly, she was staying late at the office, constantly going to business dinners and team-building events. First, I was proud of her. She was ambitious, and I thought, all right, she's pushing to advance. But then it wasn't just her hours that changed, her whole demeanor did. She was distant, like there was an invisible wall between us I couldn't break through, no matter how hard I tried. Conversations turned brief, her laugh, God, that laugh I loved, became scarce. And the bedroom? That's where things really took a nosedive. At first, I figured she was just tired. I get it. Starting a new job can be exhausting. But days stretched into weeks and weeks into months, and she was always too tired or not in the mood. I tried to be understanding, giving her space, but it was like she was drifting further away while I stood there, helpless. I remember one night vividly. It was 1 a.m., and she still wasn't home. I called, and it went straight to voicemail. She finally came in with some story about an emergency meeting that ran late. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but something felt wrong. She didn't even make eye contact when she said it. Then there was her phone. I'd never thought twice about it before, but suddenly, her phone was always face down on the table or tucked away in her purse. She used to be one of those people who couldn't put it down, constantly scrolling or texting. Now it was on Do Not Disturb all the time, and if I glanced at it, she'd snap at me like I was a nosy neighbor. Call me paranoid, but when your gut tells you something's wrong, you start noticing things. And maybe I was paranoid until I wasn't. One night, everything just fell into place. Emma had another one of her so-called business trips. Only this time I wasn't buying it. So, like an idiot, I waited up, hoping she'd come home and prove me wrong. But as the hours crawled by, the pit in my stomach grew. When she finally walked in, it was way past midnight. She smelled like perfume that wasn't hers and had this distant look in her eyes, like she was somewhere else entirely. I asked how the trip went, and she fed me some half-baked story that didn't add up. That's when I knew I needed to find out what was really happening. I'm not proud of it, but I went through her phone. After a few tries, I cracked her passcode, and God, I wished I hadn't. The messages between her and that piece of trash, Nathan, were all there. Jokes, little innuendos, things about how much they missed each other. Even photos of them together, cozy enough to make me want to punch a wall. When she got out of the shower, I was sitting there, phone in hand. I didn't even say a word. I just showed her the screen. Her face went pale for a second, but then she tried to laugh it off, saying it was all just a joke, that Nathan was just a friend. A friend. Huh? Friends don't send each other that kind of stuff. I shot back, but she kept up the excuses, even had the gall to act like I was the one in the wrong for going through her phone. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't even sorry. No guilt, no remorse, just a pile of excuses. I kept pressing for the truth, and eventually, she started with some sob story about how she hadn't felt connected to me, that I'd been emotionally distant. Seriously, I was the one holding us together while she was off finding her supportive colleague. It's not like that, she said, looking at me with those wide eyes. The same eyes that once made me feel like I was the luckiest guy alive. I needed to feel alive. Alive. That's all I could think about. She threw away 6 years of marriage just to feel alive. I don't know what made me angrier, the fact that she cheated or that she thought I was dumb enough to buy her pathetic excuses. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. If she wanted to feel alive, fine. I was going to show her just how alive I could make her feel by taking back control. That's when I decided I wasn't going to be some broken, humiliated husband. If she thought she could betray me and move on as if nothing happened, she had another thing coming. I wasn't going to leave her, not yet. First, I was going to make her regret every single moment she spent with that. So there I was, standing in the wreckage of what used to be our marriage, figuring out what the hell to do next. After I confronted Emma, sitting around and letting her off the hook wasn't an option. When you've been stabbed in the back like that, something changes inside you. It's like a switch flips, and for me, that switch was set to revenge. I wasn't about to go off crying in a corner. No way. If she thought she was too good for me, finding her freedom with some coworker, I'd show her what it felt like to be just as miserable and low. That's when I realized there was someone who could help me with my plan. Rachel, her mother. Now, before you judge me, hear me out. Rachel had always treated me with kindness. Even when Emma would fly off the handle over the smallest things, Rachel was the one telling me to stay strong, offering advice, genuinely caring about me. And yeah, I'd noticed how attractive she was. Sure, she was older, but that woman was stunning. I'd admired her for years, but now, in my messed up mind, she became more than just Emma's mom. She was the perfect way to get back at Emma. So, I started reaching out to Rachel more often, telling her I needed someone to talk to. She was always willing to help, inviting me over for dinners, checking in. I played the heartbroken husband role perfectly, telling her how Emma was pulling away, how I was struggling to hold on. It was true that I was broken, but I laid it on thick, playing the lost, helpless puppy in need of someone to lean on. Rachel fell right into it. She was so genuinely concerned, always checking if I was okay, constantly offering to help in whatever way she could, and I took full advantage. Every time I visited, I'd lay on the compliments, telling her how much her kindness meant to me, how I didn't know how I'd get through this without her. I could see in her eyes she was lapping it up, feeling like she was the one pulling me from the depths of my misery. At first, it was all innocent. She'd invite me over, saying I shouldn't be alone, and we'd sit around her kitchen, talking over a couple of glasses of wine. But then our conversations took a turn. I'd open up about how lost I felt, how I didn't know who I could trust anymore. She'd give me this look, genuinely pained, as if she was feeling every bit of my hurt right along with me. Honestly, it was too easy. Then one night, when Emma was off on another business trip, I decided it was time to take things further. Rachel had asked me to come by and help fix a leaky faucet in her kitchen. I showed up with a toolbox, but trust me, I had a lot more than plumbing repairs on my mind. After the faucet was taken care of, we moved into the living room and kept talking. She looked lonely, and, let's face it, she was starved for a little attention. I started by sitting a bit closer, resting my hand on her arm, letting my fingers linger just a moment longer than they should have. She looked flustered. I could see that, but she didn't pull away, and that's when I knew I had her. As the evening went on, I casually told her how beautiful she looked. She tried to laugh it off, but I could see her cheeks turn pink. So I made my move. I leaned in, slowly watching her reaction. She was tense, probably a little confused, but I whispered how grateful I was, how she was the only one who truly understood me. I watched her resistance melt away, piece by piece. She was alone. I was alone. And in that moment, it was like we were both searching for a little comfort. When I kissed her, she didn't push back. Instead, she kissed me right back, and before long, we were tearing at each other's clothes. I won't go into every detail, but let's just say that night, I forgot all about Emma. Nothing else mattered. Just me and Rachel right there on her couch. After that night, things between us moved fast. Whenever Emma had another business trip or late-night meeting, I'd end up at Rachel's place. She was addictive, like a drug I couldn't quit. But let's not pretend there was love here or anything romantic. For me, this was about control, about taking something from Emma she'd never expect. Every night I spent with Rachel felt like a twisted victory, a way to hit back at Emma without her even knowing. Rachel, bless her heart, thought it was all about us finding comfort together. She was clueless that I was using her to get back at her daughter, which somehow made it all the more satisfying. We'd spend hours together, and she'd talk about wanting to see me happy again, saying that maybe Emma was just going through something. She had no idea that Emma was cheating on me. No idea that her sweet daughter was off with another man. And the best part? Emma was completely in the dark. She'd call Rachel to check in, clueless that I'd spent the night in her mom's bed. I'd lie there, listening to them talk, with Rachel beside me, still half asleep, pretending everything was fine. The irony was almost too good. This went on for weeks. Each time Emma had a meeting or a weekend away, I'd find myself back at Rachel's house, and I could see her falling for it. For me, she started saying how she wished Emma had chosen a different path, how maybe things could work out between us. She had no idea how far gone we already were. But soon, my affair with Rachel didn't feel like enough. Sure, messing around with my wife's mother was satisfying as hell. But it was just the beginning. I needed Emma to experience the humiliation I felt, that gut-wrenching betrayal that gutted me when I discovered her and Nathan. So I started plotting my next move. If Emma thought she could keep playing around with that sleaze while I was clueless at home, she was in for a nasty surprise. It was time to make her pay, and Rachel was going to be my perfect accomplice. I started by dropping subtle hints, little comments that would spark suspicion without blowing my cover. I'd mention, almost casually, how Rachel and I had been spending a lot of time together, how she'd been such a solid support for me through everything. At first, people just nodded, probably thinking I was talking about getting through a rough patch. But then I'd add a little something more. A lingering look, a hand on Rachel's arm a moment too long, just innocent enough to seem like nothing, but close enough to raise eyebrows. One time, during a Sunday brunch at Emma's aunt's house, everyone was there, cousins, friends, even some of her colleagues. It was the perfect setting for my plan. I made sure to sit beside Rachel. We were just talking, harmless on the surface, but I leaned in a bit closer than I needed to, and when she laughed, I placed my hand on her knee, just for a second, in full view. Her cousin Mia shot me a strange look from across the table, raising an eyebrow and whispering to the person next to her. That's when I knew the rumor mill was kicking into high gear. From then on, whispers turned to full-blown gossip. Emma's friends started giving her strange looks, her colleagues were talking behind her back, and whenever she came home from another business trip, I'd mention how Rachel had come by to check on me. "Your mom's been such a help lately," I'd say with a totally innocent smile. "She even stayed over last weekend when you were gone. It was nice to have some company for a change." The look on Emma's face was priceless. She'd stiffen up, probably thinking I was just being passive-aggressive, but I'd smile sweetly, all innocence. And then the moment came. Emma returned from one of her trips, and you could feel the tension in the air. She had definitely heard something, and she was acting cagey, trying to dig for answers without outright asking me. I played along, the perfect clueless husband who didn't understand why she was so on edge. The breaking point hit when we attended a friend's engagement party. A big event with everyone we knew. They all loved a good scandal, and I made sure to give them one. I strolled into the engagement party with Rachel on my arm, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Emma had come separately, likely thinking she could spend the night schmoozing her colleagues, keeping up the illusion that her life was still flawless. But when Rachel and I walked in together, you could practically hear the whispers start. People were nudging each other, pointing, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. I walked right up to Emma, as casual as you please, like it was perfectly normal for me to arrive with her mother as my date. "Hey babe," I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Hope you don't mind." Rachel wanted to keep me company tonight. Her eyes went wide, and for a moment, I thought she was about to blow up right there. But she managed to keep herself together, barely. She excused herself, but not before giving me a look that could have melted steel. After that, things took on a life of their own. The rumors spread like wildfire. Emma's friends started pulling away. Her colleagues stopped inviting her to after-work events, and word got back to me that she had a meltdown at the office when someone mentioned me and Rachel. Then, the cherry on top. When Emma came home that night, she was practically shaking with either rage or humiliation. It was hard to tell which. "What are you doing with my mother?" she yelled as soon as she walked through the door. I just shrugged, putting on my most innocent face. "She's been there for me, Emma. More than you ever were." "You're disgusting," she spat, her face a fiery red. "How could you do this? With my mother?" I let her rage, screaming and cursing, getting it all out. But it didn't matter to me anymore. The damage was done. Her world was unraveling, and she had no one to blame but herself. Rachel, meanwhile, was falling apart. She called me, crying, asking why Emma wasn't speaking to her. I played the role of the comforting friend, soothing her, telling her that Emma was just overreacting. But in reality, I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. Emma was humiliated. Rachel was lost and confused, and I was in total control. Emma tried to claw back her dignity, tried to salvage her reputation, but it was too late. The scandal had done its work, and I had front-row seats to her slow, painful unraveling. But I wasn't finished. The public humiliation was just the beginning. I wanted her to suffer on every level, to strip her of everything she valued. Her career, her social standing, her pride. It was time to move on to the next stage of my plan. If she thought this was bad, she had no clue what was coming next. You'd think I'd be satisfied after blowing up her life like that. But no. Seeing her reaction to finding out about me and her mother was sweet, but it was just a taste. I didn't want a simple scandal. I wanted to watch her whole life collapse bit by bit. The affair with Rachel? That was just the warm-up. Now it was time for the real game. Dismantling everything Emma had worked so hard to build. If she thought she could just waltz into the sunset with Nathan, leaving me in the dust, she was about to learn that you don't mess with someone like me without paying the price. I started with our finances. While she'd been off in her fantasy world with Nathan, she hadn't noticed how I'd gradually taken over control of our accounts. I had access to everything. Checking, savings, investments, retirement, it was all at my fingertips. And Emma? So preoccupied with her new life, she hadn't checked a single account in months. So, I began moving things around, little by little, transferring money in ways that would barely be noticed. I opened a few accounts in my name, made some quiet investments, and even sent a chunk of our savings offshore. All the while, I kept up my act, playing the part of the wounded husband she thought she knew. I was patient, precise, draining her slowly. She didn't have a clue. She was so wrapped up in her own drama. She couldn't see what was happening right under her nose. When Emma finally caught on, it was far too late. She stormed in one evening, holding her phone like a weapon, her face flushed with anger. "What the hell is going on, Ben?" she demanded, waving her phone in my face. "Our accounts, there's money missing. Did you take it?" I leaned back in my chair, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about, Emma? I thought you were managing the finances lately." It was a complete lie, of course. I'd been quietly shifting our assets for months, altering records, covering my tracks. She'd been too busy trying to save face to even notice. Her eyes were wild, desperate. "Stop playing dumb with me. I tried to pay bills and the money's just gone, Ben." "Where did it go?" I shrugged, adding just the right amount of indifference. "Maybe you should ask Nathan. You two seem to have everything else figured out, don't you?" That shut her up. She stared at me, the accusation hanging thick in the air. I could practically see the wheels turning as she tried to figure out if I was bluffing or if she'd really lost control. By the time she realized I was serious, I'd already drained nearly everything we had in liquid assets. The house? I'd refinanced it under my name without her knowing. The joint business ventures we'd started? I'd shifted my shares into a holding company she couldn't touch. Every move I'd made was one step ahead of her, and she was scrambling to catch up. Watching her flounder, trying to patch up what was left of her life, gave me a dark, twisted satisfaction. But I wasn't stopping there. When she tried to hire a high-powered lawyer to take me down, I was ready. I hired my own lawyer, an old friend who owed me a few favors. He was ruthless, the kind of guy who'd find a loophole in anything. Together, we scoured every account, every investment, draining what little remained in her reach. Emma fought back hard. She hired some slick attorney who thought he was a genius, but I'd already built my case. I had years of documents, records showing her signing off on decisions she barely remembered, and even emails between her and Nathan discussing business expenses, which I twisted to look like she'd been embezzling from our joint accounts. When she tried to accuse me of fraud, her lawyer couldn't find a single hole in my work. The court battle was brutal, but I was relentless. Every detail, every record, I used against her. The rumors, the affair, even her own mother's betrayal. All of it weighed on Emma, wearing her down bit by bit. Every time we faced off in court or sat through another meeting with the lawyers, she looked more defeated. The confident, icy woman who once told me she needed space to find herself was now just a shattered shell of who she used to be. I had systematically torn her life apart, piece by agonizing piece, until there was almost nothing left. By the end of the divorce, it was a slaughter. I walked away with nearly everything. The house, most of our investments, and a hefty portion of her savings. Emma was left with the scraps, barely enough to scrape by after her legal fees. And her reputation? It was in tatters. The whispers followed her everywhere. Her colleagues, the same ones who once laughed with her, now avoided her like she was contagious. But the crowning moment? The look on her face when the judge read the final decree. She was pale, her eyes hollow, like she couldn't believe how far she'd fallen. And me? I stood there with a smile, feeling like the cat that got the cream. I had played her like a fiddle, and she hadn't realized it until it was far too late. After the ruling, Emma tried to confront me outside the courthouse. "Was it worth it, Ben?" she whispered, barely able to keep her voice steady. "Destroying everything we built?" I leaned in close so only she could hear. "Worth it, sweetheart?" This was just the beginning. She just stood there, tears in her eyes, but I felt nothing. She had torn my heart to pieces, so I shredded her life. And as I walked away, all I could think was how satisfying it was to see her finally get what she deserved. But even then, deep down, I knew I wasn't done. There was one final nail I wanted to drive into the coffin of our former life. It's funny. You can destroy someone's life, watch everything burn, and still wake up feeling a little empty. I won't lie. Seeing Emma reduced to nothing, walking out of that courthouse with tears in her eyes and the weight of her own mistakes pressing down on her, that felt good. But the thrill faded almost as soon as it came. Once the divorce was final, I realized I had to get the hell out of town. Too many memories, too many people who knew me only as the guy whose wife cheated on him and got what was coming to her. I needed a fresh start. So I sold the house, the very same place where all those lies and betrayals had played out, and pocketed every last cent. That's how I ended up in Phoenix. Phoenix was everything my old life wasn't. New faces, new places, and heat so intense it felt like it was burning away every trace of my past. I found a nice condo downtown. Nothing too flashy, just enough to remind me of what I'd earned. And the best part? No one here knew a damn thing about my story. I could reinvent myself however I wanted. I threw myself into my work, using connections I'd made during my marriage to secure a well-paying position. I even took over the business ventures Emma and I had started together. Those were mine now, fair and square. The company was thriving, and for the first time in years, I felt free to focus on myself without the baggage of someone else's betrayals weighing me down. But I wasn't exactly living like a monk. I had money, freedom, and a fresh start, and I intended to enjoy it. I didn't want anything serious, not after Emma had burned me. Casual flings, no strings attached, that was all I needed. Phoenix had plenty of beautiful women who were more than happy to share a drink and a night with a guy who had his life together. I was more than willing to oblige. Then came Catherine. She wasn't what I was looking for. She just happened to fall into my life. I met her at a networking event, one of those bland gatherings where everyone's pretending to care about each other's LinkedIn profiles. She was new in town, starting her own business, and there was this fire in her eyes that intrigued me. She was confident, smart, and took no crap from anyone. Not like Emma, who needed validation from every guy she met. At first, it was casual, just drinks after work, the occasional dinner. But I won't lie, Catherine got under my skin. She was nothing like Emma. Supportive, yes, but she didn't hesitate to call me out when I was being difficult. I appreciated that. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was with someone who actually saw me, not just what I could provide. But as things with Catherine heated up, I'd find myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Emma. Not because I missed her, but because I couldn't shake the look on her face when she realized just how deeply I'd cut her. I still remembered her breaking down in court, trying to convince the judge I'd manipulated our finances. She thought she could outwit me, but by then I'd played every card. Catherine didn't know any of this, of course. She knew I'd been through a rough divorce, but I kept the details vague. What was I supposed to say? Hey, by the way, I bankrupted my ex-wife and screwed her mother just to watch her suffer? Not exactly dinner conversation, so I kept it all tucked away, buried under this new life I was building. For a while, it worked. I was happy. I had Catherine, a thriving business, and no one in Phoenix had a clue about who I used to be. But every now and then, I'd get a message from an unknown number. Just a short note. Something like, "Hope you're doing well," or "Thinking of you." I knew it was Rachel. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce, but it was clear she hadn't moved on. I never responded. There was no point. Rachel had been another casualty in the war Emma started, another piece on the chessboard I used. Sometimes, on those quiet nights when Catherine was asleep beside me, I'd think back on everything I'd done, the destruction I left behind. I'd wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'd gone too far. But then I'd remember Emma's face, her desperate, tearful pleas to stop the divorce, to let her keep her dignity. And I'd feel that familiar satisfaction, knowing she'd gotten exactly what she deserved. Catherine started asking more about my past. I could tell she was trying to piece together why I held so much back sometimes. One night, over a bottle of wine, she finally pushed hard enough that I let a sliver of the truth slip. "I went through a nasty divorce," I admitted, staring into my glass. "My ex cheated on me, lied to me, and tried to screw me over. So I made sure she paid for it." Catherine sat quietly, just looking at me. I could see the questions in her eyes, the uncertainty, but she didn't press. Instead, she just nodded like she understood. And maybe she did, or maybe she was willing to overlook it because she saw something worth saving in me. For the first time in ages, I felt something close to peace. Maybe I hadn't done everything the right way, but who does? Life's messy, and sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to get what you deserve. But as Catherine and I grew closer, a thought started gnawing at the back of my mind. There's a strange kind of quiet that settles in the back of your mind after you've burned everything down around you. Could I really leave it all behind? Could I just let go of the person I'd become? The guy who took sick pleasure in watching Emma's life crumble? For now, I kept myself focused on the moment, letting Catherine think I was just a guy who'd been hurt, trying to rebuild. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was still that man, the one who had manipulated, destroyed, and relished every second of it. I wondered if I'd ever have to face that part of myself, if there would be a day when I'd pay the price. But until then, I planned to enjoy the life I'd clawed back because in the end I had one, and that was what mattered, right? The thing about revenge, though, is that it's like a drug. The high is exhilarating, almost intoxicating, but it fades quickly. I'd thought that taking everything from Emma would fill the hollow space she'd left in my life, and for a while it did. But as the months drifted by in Phoenix, I came to a realization that was more unsettling than anything Emma had ever done to me. I had one, but I still felt empty. Life had settled into a predictable rhythm with Catherine, who had become closer to me than I ever intended. She was everything Emma hadn't been. Genuine, supportive, curious about who I was, not just what I could offer. We spent weekends exploring the city, hiking trails, laughing over dinners, and for all appearances, it was perfect. But on quiet nights, I'd lie there in the dark, my thoughts pulling me back to everything I'd done to end up here. I kept telling myself that it had been necessary, that Emma's betrayal had forced my hand. She had destroyed our marriage, and I'd simply evened the score. But as time went on, that satisfaction started to sour, leaving a bitter taste. Like a meal you regret hours after you've finished it. One evening, Catherine and I had just finished a cozy dinner at an Italian place we liked. We were walking back to my place when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a work notification or a spam message. But no, it was from Rachel. Just a simple, "Hey Ben, I hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking about you." I stopped dead. I hadn't heard from Rachel since the divorce. Not since I'd used her to drive a wedge into Emma's life. The last time I'd seen her, she was crying in her kitchen, torn between the loyalty she felt for her daughter and whatever twisted connection we had. I stared at that message, a strange mix of guilt and something else I couldn't quite name rising in my chest. I let the message sit unanswered, like a reminder of everything I'd done to fuel my revenge. I told myself she was just a pawn, collateral damage. But part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. Rachel had been one of the only people who'd shown me genuine kindness, and I'd used her like a tool to hurt Emma. When we got back to my place, Catherine could sense something was off. She had this way of knowing when my mind was somewhere else. She poured us some wine, sat close on the couch, and just waited, giving me the space to open up. Eventually, I told her, not everything, but enough. I told her about Emma's betrayal, the divorce, how I'd torn apart everything we'd shared to get even. I kept the details about Rachel to myself. Some things were better left unsaid. Catherine didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. She just listened, and when I was finished, she took my hand in hers. "You went through hell?" she said softly, squeezing my hand. "But maybe it's time to let it go, Ben. You're not that man anymore." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd defined myself by my anger, by the need to be the one in control, the one with the last word. But here was Catherine, seeing something in me beyond the bitterness, beyond the revenge, and for the first time I wondered if she was right. But it's not that easy. You can't just flick a switch and suddenly become someone different. I was still haunted by that moment in court. The look on Emma's face when she realized how deeply I'd cut her, how utterly I'd taken everything from her. I'd feel that dark satisfaction bubble up, but now it was tainted by something else. Regret, maybe, or something like it. Rachel's message lingered in my mind, a reminder of the bridges I'd burned and the bodies I'd left in my wake. I'd won the battle, but at what cost? Catherine, patient as ever, gave me space, never pushing me to reveal more than I was ready for. And over time, I started to realize there might be a life beyond this. A version of me that wasn't ruled by past grudges. One night, after we'd been together nearly a year, Catherine asked me, "What do you really want, Ben?" I didn't have an answer right away. I'd spent so long chasing vengeance, controlling everything, that I hadn't considered what came next. But as I looked at her, her eyes so open and trusting, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wanted a future where I wasn't haunted by my past, where I could look forward without all the anger pulling me back. Letting go, though, that's harder than I'd ever thought. It's so much easier to stay angry, to keep blaming everyone else for the pain. But if I've learned one thing, it's that revenge is a shaky foundation to build a life on. Sure, it feels good in the moment, but after the dust settles, all you're left with is emptiness. I'm not claiming to be some saint or that I've got it all together now. I'm still the guy who wrecked his ex-wife's life without a second thought. But maybe, just maybe, I'm starting to understand that the anger was just a way to dodge the real problem, that I wasn't as innocent in all of this as I wanted to believe. Catherine doesn't know every detail, and maybe she never will. But she knows enough to see the parts of me worth holding on to, and maybe, for now, that's enough. For the first time in a long time, I'm trying to look forward, to imagine a life that isn't just about winning some twisted game. So here I am, still piecing things together, slowly, tentatively. I don't know if I'll ever fully let go of the past, but I'm trying. Destroying Emma didn't fix everything. It turns out the real battle was with myself. And now I'm working on rebuilding a life that's real, one that isn't just about getting even. Because, in the end, winning isn't worth a damn if you lose yourself in the process.